The gavel slammed down in a Montana saloon turned auction house, and Luke Carver's $2 hit the block like a gunshot. The room erupted. Men doubled over laughing, women gasped behind gloved hands. He'd just bought the one woman nobody wanted, the quiet, dirt-streaked stranger with ice in her eyes and shame written across her travel-worn dress. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, just signed her name, Clara Hartwell, like she was signing her own death warrant. What happened next would turn a desperate transaction into the most dangerous partnership either had ever known. Follow this story to the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far Clara and Luke's journey reaches across the world. The November wind hit Bitter Creek, Montana like a fist, rattling the windows of McCready's saloon and sending dust devils spinning down the rutted main street. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, whiskey fumes, and the particular kind of tension that came when desperate men gathered to watch desperate women parade across rough-hewn floorboards. Luke Carver stood in the back corner, hat pulled low, trying to blend into the shadows. He'd come to town for supplies: flour, coffee, ammunition. Not for this. The bride auction had been McCready's idea, a quarterly event that brought in travelers, spectators, and enough coin to keep the saloon profitable through the brutal winter months. Luke found the whole thing distasteful, but McCready extended credit to ranchers struggling through hard times, and Luke Carver was struggling harder than most. His ranch, if you could still call it that, sat 12 miles north in a valley that had once run thick with cattle. Now the herd had dwindled to maybe 40 head, half of them too lean to sell, the other half barely worth the grass they ate. 2 years of drought, a hard winter that killed his breeding stock, and the slow hemorrhage of debt had reduced Luke's operation to something that existed mostly on paper and stubbornness. He was 32 years old and felt 50. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and hard weather, his face weathered to leather, his clothes patched more than once. The silver in his pocket, $2 and some change, represented the last of his ready cash until spring. He'd planned to spend it on necessities, maybe stretch it with McCready's credit, and pray the winter was kind. But then the auction started and something shifted in the room. The first woman, blonde, young, visibly frightened, sold for $40 to a blacksmith from Helena. The crowd cheered. The second, a widow with 2 children, went for $35 to a shopkeeper who needed help with his store. Respectable transactions, all things considered. The women got security, the men got companionship and labor. It wasn't romance, but it was honest. Then Clara walked onto the platform, and the room changed. She was tall, taller than most of the men expected a mail-order bride to be, and she moved with a strange, quiet dignity that didn't match her circumstances. Her dress was brown wool, travel-stained and dusty, the hem torn in 2 places. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so carefully blank. No tears, no pleading eyes, no desperate smile trying to charm a buyer, just ice-cold composure and a gaze that swept the room like she was cataloging every face for future reckoning. McCready, playing auctioneer, cleared his throat. "This here's Clara Hartwell, 28 years old, come all the way from Philadelphia. Got references as a..." He squinted at the paper in his hand. "Bookkeeper and household manager. Can read and write, do sums, manage property." "Can she cook?" someone shouted. "Can she take orders?" another voice called, followed by rough laughter. Clara's expression didn't change. She stood perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, while men evaluated her like livestock. "Starting bid," McCready announced. $20. Silence. The room shifted uncomfortably. $20 was low, insultingly low for a woman with Clara's qualifications, but nobody moved. "Come now, gentlemen," McCready cajoled. "Educated woman, good with numbers, strong back." "She's too tall," someone muttered. "Too proud," another voice added. "Look at her," a third man said, just loud enough to carry. "Thinks she's better than this. Probably run off soon as winter breaks." McCready's smile tightened. $15. Going once. Clara's jaw clenched, the first crack in her composure. $10, McCready said, desperation creeping into his voice. The woman had paid passage west, paid for lodging, and if she didn't sell, it reflected badly on his operation. Surely someone... $5. This from a rancher named Polk, grinning like he'd just told the world's best joke. Hell, I'd pay $5 just to see if she can actually smile. The room erupted in laughter. Clara's face went white, then red, but she didn't move, didn't break. Luke felt something twist in his chest, something uncomfortable that might have been shame or anger or just the recognition of one broken thing seeing another. $5 going once, McCready said, clearly disgusted but committed to finishing. Going twice. Luke's hand moved before his brain caught up. 2 silver dollars hit the wooden block with a sharp metallic crack that cut through the noise like a blade. Every head turned. Luke stepped forward, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes. His boots sounded too loud on the plank floor. $2, he said quietly. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the room exploded. Men howled with laughter, slapping tables in each other's backs. Women gasped or giggled behind their hands. Someone shouted, "Luke Carver finally found his match." Another voice called, "He's buying the Ice Queen with his last 2 bits." Polk, red-faced with mirth, wheezed out, "Carver, you ain't even got a pot to piss in, and you're buying a woman who looks like she'd rather freeze than share your fire." The laughter rolled like thunder. Luke ignored it. He kept his eyes on McCready, who looked genuinely torn between relief at closing the sale and concern for what came next. $2, Luke repeated. Cash money. That's my bid. McCready glanced at Clara, who stood absolutely frozen on the platform, her face unreadable. "Ma'am, you understand the terms? This man's offer—" "I understand," Clara said. Her voice was low, controlled, each word measured like currency. "I accept." The laughter died to scattered chuckles. McCready produced the papers, standard territory marriage contracts, legal and binding once signed. Luke approached the platform, very aware of how the room watched. Up close, Clara was even taller than he'd thought, nearly eye to eye with him. She smelled like train smoke and exhaustion. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly, only for her. Her eyes met his, gray, hard, unforgiving. "Are you?" Fair question. Luke took the pen McCready offered, signed his name, and slid the paper toward Clara. She signed without hesitation, her handwriting neat and precise. Clara Margaret Hartwell. Then she set the pen down and folded her hands, waiting. "You got belongings?" Luke asked. "One trunk at the boarding house. We'll collect it." He turned to McCready, ignoring the stares. "I still need flour, coffee, and ammunition. Put it on credit." McCready nodded, clearly relieved to be done with the whole affair. "You got it, Luke. I'll have Jessup load your wagon." Luke offered his hand to help Clara down from the platform. She looked at it for a long moment, long enough that he thought she might refuse, then took it. Her palm was calloused, her grip firm. The walk through the saloon to the door felt like walking through fire. Every eye followed them, every whisper cut. "Won't last a month. Too proud for ranch work. He can't even feed himself." Luke pushed through the doors into the cold November air, and Clara followed without a word. His wagon stood at the hitching post, a battered buckboard with 2 tired horses and empty supply boxes. Clara regarded it with the same blank expression she'd given everything else. "Boarding house is 2 blocks east," she said. They walked in silence. The afternoon sun hung low and pale, offering light but no warmth. Bitter Creek bustled around them, miners coming off shift, freight wagons rumbling past, children racing down the wooden sidewalks. But Luke felt isolated, moving through a space that existed separate from the town's life. The boarding house was a narrow 2-story structure run by a widow named Mrs. Kowalski. She took one look at Luke and Clara and seemed to understand immediately. "I'll fetch her trunk," she said simply. Clara's trunk turned out to be a small, battered case that had seen better days. Mrs. Kowalski handed it to Luke with surprising gentleness. "You take care," she said to Clara, her accent thick with Polish roots. "Winter comes hard here." "Thank you," Clara said. It was the first time Luke had heard anything like warmth in her voice. They loaded the trunk onto the wagon. Luke helped Clara onto the bench seat. She climbed up with efficient, practiced movements, then swung up beside her. The horses knew the way home and started without prompting. Bitter Creek fell away behind them. The road north was rutted and rough, climbing gradually into rolling prairie that stretched toward distant mountains. The wind picked up as they left the shelter of the town, cutting through Luke's coat and making Clara pull her shawl tighter. Miles passed. Neither spoke. Luke tried to find words, some explanation, some reassurance, but everything he thought of sounded hollow or stupid. "I'm not a bad man" seemed inadequate. "You'll be safe" was presumptuous. "This will work out" was a lie he couldn't make himself tell. Finally, as the sun touched the western horizon and painted the prairie gold, Clara spoke. "Why?" One word. Luke knew exactly what she meant. He considered lying, offering some noble reason, but they'd started this transaction with honesty, brutal, public honesty, and he wouldn't cheapen it now with pretty words. "I needed help," he said. "The ranch is dying. I can't manage the work alone anymore. Can't afford to hire hands. Can't even keep up with basic maintenance. Winter's coming. I figured..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I figured a partnership. Honest work for honest shelter. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" Clara repeated, her tone unreadable. "I'm not expecting..." Luke felt heat rise in his face. "I mean, the cabin's got 2 rooms. You'll have the bedroom. I'll sleep by the fire. You're not obligated..." "Stop," Clara said quietly. "I understand. You bought labor, not..." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. "I didn't buy anything," Luke said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Those papers make us legal partners. The ranch, what's left of it, belongs to both of us now. You work it, you own it. That's law." Clara turned to look at him then, really look, and Luke saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Why tell me that?" she asked. "Because it's true, and because I won't have you thinking you're property. You're not. You're a partner, and partners know where they stand." The wagon rattled over a rough patch of road. The horses snorted, their breath visible in the cooling air. "Partners?" Clara said finally. "All right. Then I need to know what I'm partnering with. Tell me about your ranch." So Luke told her. He laid it out plainly, without decoration or excuse. The 160 acres he'd claimed 5 years ago. The cabin he'd built log by log. The herd he'd started with money earned working freight lines and mining camps. The good years when cattle prices were high and grass grew thick. Then the drought. The winter kill. The debts that piled up like snow. "Right now," he said as they crested a hill and the valley opened before them, "I've got maybe 40 head of cattle, 2 horses, 3 milk cows, chickens if the foxes haven't gotten them all, and that cabin." He pointed. In the valley below, smoke rose from a small structure that looked even more run down from a distance than it did up close. The barn was missing boards. The corral fence sagged. The whole operation had the tired, desperate look of something barely hanging on. "That's home," Luke said, "such as it is." Clara studied the valley in silence, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "How much debt?" she asked. Luke blinked. "What?" "You said you owe money." "How much?" "About $200 to McCready and the mercantile, plus what I'll owe for today's supplies. So $215 roughly." "About that." "What's the land worth?" Luke had to think. "Maybe 400 if someone wanted it bad enough. Not many do. It's isolated, water's seasonal, and the grass only grows good in wet years." Clara nodded slowly. "And the cattle?" "Market price? Maybe 300 total if I could get them to market healthy. Big if. So you have assets worth approximately $700 against debt of $250. She paused. "That's manageable." Luke stared at her. "Manageable? You're not bankrupt. You're cash poor and over-leveraged, but the assets exist. You just need to stop the bleeding and generate revenue." She turned to him, and for the first time he saw something other than ice in her eyes, something sharp and focused. "How many cattle could this land support in a good year?" "Maybe 150 head, 200 if I managed it right." "Then that's the goal, rebuild the herd. But first..." She looked back at the valley. "First, we survive winter. What's your feed situation?" Luke felt something strange happening. The conversation had shifted, and Clara was suddenly speaking a language he barely understood. Feed situation? Hay, grain, stored fodder for winter feeding. I've got about 2 tons of hay put up, maybe 3 weeks of grain for the horses and milk cows. Not enough, Clara said immediately. Not if we get a hard winter. We'll need to ration carefully and supplement with whatever we can find. Are there sheltered grazing areas where cattle can winter feed? Some. Down in the cottonwood draws, there's usually grass under the snow if it's not too deep. Then we split the herd, keep the weakest close for supplemental feeding. Push the strong ones to the draws to fend for themselves. It's harsh, but it's better than losing them all. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop at the top of the hill, staring at this woman who'd been silent as stone for hours and was now discussing herd management like she'd been born to it. You know ranching, he said. Something flickered across Clara's face. Old pain, quickly hidden. I know management. I know numbers. I know how to assess resources and make them stretch. The specific application doesn't matter much. It matters when you're freezing in a blizzard trying to save a calf. Then you'll teach me that part, Clara said simply. And I'll teach you how to keep better books and maybe turn a profit instead of just surviving. The sun dropped below the horizon and the valley filled with shadows. Luke clicked his tongue, and the horses started down the long slope toward the cabin. As they drew closer, the full reality of what Clara had agreed to became undeniable. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet by 16, built of rough logs with a sod roof that sprouted grass in summer. One window shuttered now against the cold, a door that hung slightly crooked. Smoke rose from a stone chimney that Luke had built himself, and it drew surprisingly well. But that was about the only thing that worked perfectly. The barn was worse, half the size it should be, with gaps in the walls where wind whistled through. The chicken coop was holding together mostly through optimism and baling wire. Luke pulled the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake. He climbed down, then offered Clara his hand again. She took it, descended, and stood looking at her new home in the gathering darkness. It's not much, Luke said quietly. No, Clara agreed. It's not. They stood there in the cold as night fell around them, 2 strangers bound by paper and silver, looking at a failing ranch that would either kill them or make them stronger. There's wood stacked by the door, Luke said finally. I'll get a fire going, heat some water if you want to wash up. Supper's nothing special, beans and cornbread, but it's hot. Clara nodded. I'll need to see the interior, assess what we're working with. Luke carried her trunk inside. The cabin was dark until he lit the kerosene lamp that hung from a beam. Warm light filled the single room, revealing exactly what Clara had expected, and possibly worse. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and Luke's sleeping space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with Luke's bedroll arranged nearby. A rough table and 2 chairs occupied the center. Shelves held supplies, flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, in amounts that Clara could see were dangerously low. A cast-iron stove stood in the corner, its surface scarred but functional. A doorway hung with a blanket led to the bedroom, a tiny space barely large enough for the narrow bed and small dresser it contained. I'll move my things out here, Luke said, gesturing to the main room. You'll have privacy. Clara walked through the cabin, her footsteps quiet on the packed earth floor. She touched nothing, just observed, the way someone might survey a battlefield before deciding strategy. The roof leaks, she said. It wasn't a question. Northwest corner, I've got it patched, but a hard rain will find it. The window needs better sealing. I know? The food stores won't last through January. I know that too. Clara turned to face him, and in the lamplight her features seemed softer, more human. Then we have a lot of work ahead of us. We do. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, a gesture that felt like a commitment, a declaration of intent. Show me where things are. I'll start supper while you tend the animals. They worked in silence, moving around each other with the careful politeness of strangers sharing space. Luke showed Clara where he kept supplies, explained the quirks of the stove, then headed out to feed the horses and check the cattle. Outside, the November night was clear and cold, stars beginning to appear overhead. Luke worked quickly, measuring grain, checking water, counting heads in the darkness. The cattle were restless, sensing winter's approach. He'd need to move them to better grazing soon, needed to repair the barn, needed to do 100 things he couldn't afford. But now he had help. Strange, unexpected help in the form of a woman who'd stood on an auction block and refused to break. When he returned to the cabin, warmth and the smell of cooking greeted him. Clara had found the beans, the cornmeal, the bit of bacon he'd been saving. She'd made coffee, real coffee, not the weak stuff he'd been stretching, and the pot bubbled on the stove. "Wash water's warm," she said without looking up from her cooking. "Basin's on the shelf." Luke cleaned up quickly, scrubbing his hands and face, trying to wash off the strange day and stranger evening. When he sat down at the table, Clara served the food. Simple, hot, and more than he'd eaten in one sitting for weeks. They ate without speaking. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. Just two people too tired and overwhelmed to make conversation. After supper, Clara washed the dishes with water heated on the stove. Luke added wood to the fire and spread his bedroll near the hearth. The domesticity of it felt surreal. This morning he'd been alone, and now this tall, quiet woman moved through his cabin like she was trying to understand its rhythms. "The bedroom's ready," Luke said when she'd finished cleaning. "There's extra blankets in the chest if you need them. Gets cold at night." Clara dried her hands on a cloth, folded it precisely, and set it aside. "I need to understand the expectations," she said. Luke looked up from the fire. "Expectations? You said we're partners. You said I'm not property. I need to know if those were words or truth." The directness of it caught Luke off guard. He stood slowly, meeting her eyes. "They're truth. I meant every word." "Then I need you to understand something," Clara said, and her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the back of the chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I came west because I had nothing left to lose. Everything I had, my reputation, my position, my future, was destroyed by someone who had more power and fewer scruples. I ran because staying meant slow destruction, and I chose quick uncertainty instead." Luke waited. He sensed she needed to say this, needed him to hear it. "I don't trust easily," Clara continued. "I don't expect kindness because experience taught me it usually comes with hidden costs. When you put those $2 down, I figured you were buying exactly what every other man in that room wanted to buy. Someone desperate enough to accept whatever treatment came with a roof." "I'm not—" "Let me finish." Clara's voice sharpened. "But you've been decent. You've been honest. And that's more than I expected. So I'm telling you now, I'll work harder than any hired hand you could afford. I'll manage this ranch, fix what's broken, and turn those numbers from red to black if it's possible. But I won't be handled like property. I won't be patronized, and I won't be protected from hard truths." She released the chair, standing straighter. "If we're partners, then treat me like one. Show me the real work, the real problems. Don't hide things because you think I'm too fragile to handle them. I'm not fragile. I'm just broke and desperate, and there's a difference." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Luke felt something shift in his chest. Respect, maybe, or recognition. This woman had been beaten down by circumstances, humiliated in public, sold for pocket change, and she was still standing there demanding to be treated with dignity. "All right," he said quietly. "Partners. Real ones. That means we share everything, the work, the decisions, the risk. And it means I tell you the truth, even when it's ugly." "Especially when it's ugly," Clara corrected. "Especially then," Luke agreed. Clara nodded once, sharply. "Then we have an understanding." She turned toward the bedroom, paused at the blanket curtain doorway, and looked back. "Thank you," she said, the words stiff as if she wasn't used to saying them. "For the $2, for decency, for honesty. Thank you for taking a chance on a dying ranch, and a desperate man," Luke replied. The ghost of something that might have been a smile touched Clara's lips. Then she disappeared into the bedroom, and Luke heard the soft sounds of her settling in, the creak of the bed, the rustle of fabric, the small movements of someone trying to find comfort in an unfamiliar space. Luke laid down by the fire, pulling his blankets around him. Through the thin walls, he could hear the wind picking up, rattling the shutters, whispering of the winter to come. Tomorrow would bring 100 problems, 1,000 tasks, and no guarantees. But tonight, for the first time in months, Luke Carver didn't feel completely alone. In the bedroom, Clara lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see. The bed was narrow but clean, the blankets rough but warm. Outside, wind moaned around the cabin's corners, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. She'd gambled everything on those signed papers, on $2 and a stranger's word. Back east, people would call her insane. They'd say she'd thrown herself away, accepted degradation, chosen a fate worse than poverty. But Clara had learned something important in the wreckage of her old life. Sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. Sometimes you had to accept the unacceptable, embrace the impossible, and build something new from the ashes of everything that burned. She'd stood on that auction block and felt every eye judging her, weighing her, finding her wanting. She'd heard the laughter, felt the contempt, understood exactly what those men thought she was worth. $2. But Luke Carver had looked at her differently, not with lust or pity or cruelty, just with tired honesty. And when he'd said they were partners, when he told her the truth about his failing ranch and crushing debt, Clara had heard something in his voice that she recognized. Desperation, yes, but also stubborn determination. The refusal to quit, even when quitting, made sense. She understood that. She was built from the same material. Tomorrow she'd start learning this new life. She'd figure out cattle and ranching and how to survive in a place that killed the weak and unprepared. She'd take Luke Carver's dying ranch and apply everything she'd learned in her years of managing accounts, properties, and operations for men who never saw her as anything but a useful tool. This time, though, the success would be hers too. The work would matter because it was her future, her home, her partnership. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the distant sounds of Luke moving in the main room as he settled for sleep. Two strangers under one roof, bound by paper and circumstance, facing a Montana winter with nothing but determination and hope. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, it wasn't the future she'd planned, but it was hers. Bought with courage instead of silver, built on honesty instead of pretense. And that, Clara thought, as sleep finally pulled her under, that might be enough. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Montana Valley, and Clara woke to the sound of someone moving in the main room. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the rough blankets, the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Then it all came rushing back. The auction, the laughter. Luke Carver's $2 hitting the block. She dressed quickly in the dim light filtering through the small window, braiding her hair with efficient movements. Her brown dress was wrinkled from travel, but it would have to do until she could wash and mend. When she pushed aside the blanket curtain, Luke was already up, fully dressed, poking at the fire. "Coffee's hot," he said without turning around. "There's bread if you want it." "Thank you." Clara poured herself a cup from the pot on the stove, the tin mug warm against her cold hands. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. Luke straightened, studying her in the morning light. "I need to ride out and check the herd this morning. Move some cattle to better grazing before the weather turns. It's hard work. Cold, long hours in the saddle. You're welcome to stay here. Get settled." "I'm coming with you," Claire said. Luke's eyebrows rose. "It's not easy riding, rough country, and the cattle don't cooperate." "Then you'll need help." Clara met his gaze steadily. "We agreed. Partners. That means I learn the work." She saw him weighing it, considering arguments, then something in his expression shifted. He nodded. "All right, but you'll need different clothes. That dress won't last an hour in the saddle." "I have riding clothes in my trunk. Give me 5 minutes." When Clara emerged from the bedroom wearing a split skirt and sturdy jacket that had seen better days, Luke was saddling the horses. She noticed his surprise, quickly masked, and chose not to comment. Let him wonder. Let him see that she wasn't the helpless city woman he might have assumed. The two horses were hardy range stock, a bay gelding Luke called Red, and a smaller sorrel mare named Dancer. Luke handed Clara the mare's reins. "She's got good sense," he said. "Won't spook easy, knows cattle. Just give her head when we're working." Clara mounted smoothly, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. Luke's expression shifted again. Reassessment, maybe curiosity. But he said nothing. They rode out as the sun broke through the eastern clouds, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The land rolled away in every direction, grass brown from autumn cold, scattered cottonwoods marking creek beds and draws. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that Clara was beginning to understand matched everything else about this place. "The main herd's about 3 miles north," Luke said as they rode. "I've been keeping them close, but the grass is played out. There's better grazing in the cottonwood draws. More shelter, too, when the storms hit. Problem is, it's harder to watch them there. Predators, rustlers, getting scattered, all bigger risks." "But they'll starve if they stay where they are," Clara said. "Exactly." Luke guided his horse around a washout. "So we move the strong ones and keep the weak close. Hope we guessed right about which is which." They rode in silence for a while, the horse's hooves crunching on frozen ground. Clara felt the cold seeping through her clothes, but there was something exhilarating about it too, the vast open space, the clean air, the sense of purpose. She'd spent too many years in cramped offices and stuffy parlors. This was different. Hard, yes, but honest. The cattle appeared as dark shapes scattered across a hillside, grazing on whatever sparse vegetation remained. Luke pulled up, studying them with an experienced eye. 43 head, he said. "Lost 2 since last week. Probably coyotes got the calves." Clara counted quickly, her mind automatically cataloging numbers. "You said 40 yesterday." "Did I?" Luke's mouth tightened. "Must have miscounted, or maybe I didn't want to admit it." "We'll need accurate numbers," Clara said. "For planning." "I know." He nudged Red forward. "Come on, let's sort them." What followed was the hardest physical work Clara had done in years. They moved through the herd, Luke pointing out which animals to separate based on criteria Clara was learning on the fly. Body condition, age, behavior. The cattle didn't want to be sorted. They scattered, doubled back, and generally made every task twice as difficult as it needed to be. But Clara watched how Luke worked, how he used the horse and his position to guide the animals, and she started to understand the logic of it. Dancer seemed to know the work instinctively, responding to pressure from Clara's legs and small shifts in weight. By mid-morning, they'd separated roughly 20 animals, the strongest, healthiest cattle, from the main group. "These go to the draws," Luke said, breathing hard. His face was red from cold and effort. "The rest stay close to the ranch." "How far to the draws?" 5 miles west. We'll push them slow, let them graze as they go. Should take most of the day." It took longer. The cattle moved like they had all the time in the world, stopping to graze, wandering off course, testing every boundary. The sun climbed higher, offering light but little warmth. Clara's hands went numb inside her gloves. Her face felt frozen, and muscles she didn't know she had began to ache. But she didn't complain. She watched, learned, and worked. Around noon, they stopped to let the cattle rest and graze in a sheltered spot. Luke produced hardtack and jerky from his saddlebag, offering half to Clara. They ate standing, too cold to sit. "You ride well," Luke said finally. "Didn't expect that." My father kept horses," Clara said. "Before he died. I spent more time in the stable than the parlor when I was young." "What happened?" "If you don't mind me asking." Clara was quiet for a moment, chewing the tough jerky. "He made bad investments, lost everything, died of a heart condition the doctors said was brought on by stress, left my mother and me with nothing but debts." She took a sip from her canteen. "I was 16, had to find work." "That's when you became a bookkeeper?" "Eventually. First I was a household servant, then a clerk, then finally someone saw I had a head for numbers and gave me real work." She stared out at the grazing cattle. "I was good at it. Built a reputation, managed accounts for wealthy families, small businesses, even helped reorganize a shipping company's finances." "So what went wrong?" Clara's jaw tightened, the question she'd been avoiding, the story she didn't want to tell. But they'd agreed on honesty, and lies had a way of festering. "I worked for a man named Charles Whitmore," she said quietly. "Prominent family, shipping interests, political connections. He hired me to manage his household accounts and business ledgers. I did good work, saved him money, found inefficiencies, kept everything running smoothly." She paused, and Luke waited. "Then I found the discrepancies. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. payments to shell companies, falsified shipping records, bribes to port officials. He was defrauding his investors and using company funds for personal expenses, tens of thousands of dollars. You confronted him, Luke said. I documented everything first, built a complete case. Then I went to him privately, gave him a chance to make it right. Claire's voice went flat. He laughed, said no one would believe a woman over him, said if I caused trouble, he'd destroy me. But you didn't back down. I took the evidence to his investors and to the authorities. Claire's hands clenched around the canteen. That's when he showed me exactly how much power he had. Within a week, I was dismissed. My reputation was destroyed. He spread rumors that I'd been stealing, that I'd fabricated evidence to cover my own crimes, that I'd tried to extort him. Other women came forward claiming I'd been inappropriate with their husbands. All lies, but lies told by the right people. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and cold earth. No one would hire me, Claire continued. No one would even speak to me. My landlord evicted me. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. In 3 weeks, I went from respected professional to pariah. She finally looked at Luke. So I took what little money I had, bought a train ticket west, and signed up for McCready's auction, because anything was better than staying in Philadelphia and watching Charles Whitmore walk free while I starved. Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. That's why you didn't break yesterday. On the block. I'd already been broken, Claire said simply. Standing there being laughed at was nothing compared to watching everything I'd built turn to ash because I told the truth. For what it's worth, Luke said, I believe you. About all of it. Clara felt something crack in her chest, some small protected place that hadn't expected kindness. Why? Because I've seen how power works, how men with money and connections can rewrite reality to suit them. He gathered Red's reins. And because you've got the look of someone who knows exactly what truth costs. They rode on, pushing the cattle west toward the cottonwood draws. The afternoon stretched long and cold, the work relentless. But something had shifted between them. The sharing of stories, the acknowledgement of wounds. They were still strangers, still learning each other's rhythms, but the ice had cracked. By the time they reached the draws, a series of valleys where cottonwoods clustered along a half-frozen creek, both Clara and Luke were exhausted. The cattle, sensing water and shelter, moved more willingly into the protected areas. They'll be all right here, Luke said, studying the herd with satisfaction. Better grass, protection from wind. We'll check on them every few days. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them too tired for conversation. The sun was setting when they finally saw the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney that Clara realized Luke must have banked before they left. After tending the horses, they stumbled inside. Clara's legs trembled as she dismounted, her hands so cold she could barely feel them. Luke got the fire built up while Clara heated water for coffee and found the last of the beans. You did good work today, Luke said as they ate. Real good. Thought you might give up halfway through. I don't give up, Clara said. The words came out sharper than she intended, but Luke just nodded. I'm learning that. After supper, Clara insisted on seeing Luke's account books. He produced them reluctantly, a battered ledger with numbers scrawled in uneven columns. Clara lit the lamp, settled at the table, and began to read. What she found made her wince. Not because Luke was dishonest, the numbers were accurate as far as she could tell, but because the organization was chaos. Income and expenses mixed together, no clear categories, no running totals. It would take hours to make sense of it. I know it's bad, Luke said, watching her face. It's not bad, it's just... Clara paused, choosing words carefully. Incomplete. You've got all the pieces, but they're not assembled in a way that shows the real picture. Can you fix it? Yes, but I need to understand the full situation first. She turned pages, frowning. These payments to McCready, they're irregular. Sometimes $20, sometimes $5. What determines the amount? Whatever I could afford that month. And the interest? Luke looked uncomfortable. 10% monthly on the outstanding balance. Clara's head snapped up. 10% monthly? That's 120% annually. That's... She caught herself, forcing calm. That's usurious. It's what he offered. I didn't have other options. Clara's mind was already racing, calculating. How much did you originally borrow? $100 2 years ago. And you've paid back? She scanned the ledger, adding quickly. About $80 total? Sounds right. So you still owe him $120, even though you've nearly paid back the original amount. Clara set down the pen. Luke, at this rate, you'll never get out from under this debt. The interest is growing faster than you can pay it down. I know, Luke said quietly, but what choice do I have? Clara stared at the numbers, her bookkeeper's mind working through scenarios. We need to renegotiate. Show him that giving you better terms means he actually gets paid. Right now, he's just bleeding you dry. McCready doesn't renegotiate. Everyone renegotiates when the alternative is getting nothing. Clara's voice was firm. Trust me, I've done this before. Luke looked skeptical but tired enough not to argue. We can try, but don't expect miracles. They worked for another hour, Clara asking questions, Luke providing answers, slowly building a clearer picture of the ranch's finances. It was grim, worse than Luke had initially suggested, but not hopeless. The assets were there, they just needed time and better management. Finally, Clara closed the ledger, rubbing her tired eyes. We'll work on this more tomorrow. Right now I can barely think. You should rest. Today was hard. Clara stood, and her legs nearly buckled. Luke caught her elbow, steadying her. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're exhausted, and probably saddle sore. First day riding in a while? Try first day riding in 5 years. Clara managed a tight smile. I'll feel it tomorrow. There's liniment in the cupboard, helps with the ache. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, Luke's hand still on her elbow, both suddenly aware of the contact. He released her, stepping back. Well, good night then. Good night. Clara made it to the bedroom before her legs gave out completely. She collapsed on the bed, every muscle screaming. Outside, she heard Luke moving around the main room, banking the fire, settling in for the night. She'd done it, survived the first full day, proven she could work, could learn, could hold her own. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more challenges, more cold and exhaustion. But tonight, lying in the darkness with her body aching and her mind racing through numbers and plans, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of relentless work and bone-deep exhaustion. Clara learned the ranch's rhythms, up before dawn to start the fire and make coffee, feed the chickens and milk the cows, then whatever larger task the day demanded. Repairing fence lines, splitting wood, checking the cattle, hauling water when the creek partially froze. Luke taught her without condescension, showing her how to mend a broken fence post, how to read weather signs in the clouds, how to tell which cow was likely to cause trouble. Clara absorbed it all, her mind cataloging information the way it once cataloged financial data. In the evenings, after supper, they worked on the books together. Clara reorganized the ledger, creating clear categories and tracking systems. She calculated exactly how many cattle they'd need to sell in spring to make debt payments, how much hay they'd need to last until grass greened up, what their monthly burn rate was for basic supplies. The numbers were daunting, but no longer mysterious. And in Clara's experience, things you could measure were things you could manage. 3 weeks after the auction, the first real snow came. Clara woke to unusual silence, that particular quiet that comes when snow blankets the world. She pushed aside the bedroom blanket to find Luke already up, standing at the window. How much? She asked. 6 inches, still coming down. He turned from the window. We need to check the cattle. Both herds. They bundled up in every layer they owned and headed out into the white world. The snow was beautiful, coating every branch and fence post, softening the harsh lines of the landscape. But Clara had learned enough to see the danger in it. The cattle would struggle to find grass under the snow. Weaker animals might freeze. And this was just the beginning of winter. The herd near the ranch was huddled against the barn, miserable but alive. Luke and Clara broke open the limited hay supply, spreading it for the hungry animals. We'll need to watch their water, Luke said. Creek's probably frozen solid. We'll have to break ice twice a day. The ride out to the cottonwood draws was harder. The snow made the trail treacherous, and the wind had picked up, driving snow into their faces. But when they reached the draws, the cattle there were in better shape. The cottonwoods provided windbreak, and they'd found grass in sheltered spots. "They'll make it," Luke said, satisfaction in his voice. "Good call moving them when we did." On the ride back, the storm intensified. Visibility dropped to just a few feet, the wind howling across the prairie. Clara lost feeling in her face and hands, trusting Dancer to follow Red through the whiteout. When they finally reached the cabin, they were both half frozen. Luke got the fire roaring while Clara heated water, and they thawed out slowly, painfully. "That was close," Luke said, cupping a mug of hot coffee. "Storm came in faster than I expected." "Will they be all right?" Clara asked. "The cattle in the draws?" "Should be. They've got shelter, but we won't be able to check them for a few days if this keeps up." The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped in the cabin, venturing out only to tend the nearby animals and gather firewood. It was the longest they'd spent in close quarters, and Clara discovered new things about her partner. Luke was quieter than she'd first thought, comfortable with silence. He read. She found a small collection of books hidden under his bedroll, everything from cattle management guides to worn copies of Shakespeare. He whittled, his hands shaping small wooden figures with surprising delicacy, and he was scrupulously respectful of boundaries. He never entered her room without permission, never asked probing questions, never made her feel uncomfortable in the close quarters. On the second day, Clara found herself telling him about her mother, how she'd died 6 months after Clara's father, simply giving up on life. How Clara had been completely alone after that, building her career as the only family she had left. "That's why the ranch matters," she said, staring into the fire. "Not just the work or the partnership. It's the first time in 10 years I've had something that could be home." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "My folks died when I was 19, he said finally. "Cholera. Lost my sister too. Came west because I couldn't stand being in Ohio anymore, seeing their graves every day. Thought I could build something new out here, something that was mine." "And did you?" "I don't know yet." He looked around the small cabin. "Ask me again in spring." On the third day, the storm broke. They ventured out into a world transformed. Snow halfway up the cabin walls, drifts sculpted into strange shapes, the sky brilliant blue. The cold was ferocious, but the sun on the snow was beautiful. "We need to check the draws," Luke said. The ride-out was treacherous, the horses laboring through deep snow. When they reached the cottonwood draws, Clara's heart sank. The cattle were scattered, some missing entirely. "Damn it," Luke said softly. He rode through the herd, counting. "We're down 5 head, maybe more. Hard to tell with the snow." They spent hours searching, finding 2 cattle dead in a ravine frozen where they'd fallen. The other 3 were simply gone, wandered off, taken by predators, or buried somewhere in the snow. The ride back was silent, both of them feeling the loss. 5 cattle represented real money, real assets. They couldn't afford losses like that. That night, Clara ran the numbers again. With the loss, their spring position looked worse. They'd have less to sell, less buffer against disaster. "We need to bring them all in," she said finally. "The herd in the draws. The losses are too great." "There's not enough hay," Luke said. "Then we ration more carefully, find other feed, but we can't afford to lose more cattle." Luke rubbed his face. "You're right. We'll move them tomorrow if the weather holds." They did, spending 2 brutal days gathering the scattered herd and pushing them back to the ranch. It meant crowding, meant the grass near the cabin would be gone even faster, meant more work every day. But the cattle were alive and accounted for. A week later, Clara was in the barn checking the hay supply when she noticed something wrong. One of the milk cows was acting strangely, refusing food, isolating herself, breathing hard. She found Luke repairing fence near the corral. "Something's wrong with Bess, the spotted cow." Luke dropped his tools and followed her to the barn. One look at the cow and his face went grim. "Pneumonia. Probably caught cold during the storm. Can we treat it?" "Keep her warm, dry, try to get her to eat. But honestly," he shook his head, "most don't make it." Clara refused to accept that. She spent the next 3 days in the barn, wrapped in blankets, coaxing the sick cow to drink, keeping fresh bedding under her, talking to her in the long, cold hours. Luke brought her food, coffee, told her she was wasting her time. But on the fourth day, Bess stood up and demanded hay. Her fever had broken. She was going to live. Luke found Clara asleep in the barn, exhausted but triumphant. He woke her gently. "You did it," he said, and there was something in his voice, respect, admiration, maybe more. "We can't afford to lose her," Clara said, too tired to move. "Every animal matters. Come on, let's get you inside before you catch pneumonia yourself." He helped her to the cabin, and Clara was too exhausted to protest. Inside, the fire was warm, and Luke had made soup, actual vegetable soup with chunks of salt pork, not just beans. "Where did you get vegetables?" Clara asked. "Traded for them. Took a chicken to town while you were playing doctor." They ate in comfortable silence, and Clara realized something had shifted again. They'd gone from strangers to partners to something that felt almost like friendship. They worked together seamlessly now, anticipated each other's needs, communicated with glances and small gestures. The cabin felt less like a shelter and more like home. "I've been thinking about McCready," Clara said, "about the debt. And? I want to go talk to him, present a payment plan that actually makes sense, show him the numbers." Luke looked doubtful. "He's not a reasonable man." "Maybe not, but he's a businessman, and businessmen understand profit versus loss." Clara's voice was firm. "Let me try." "When?" "Tomorrow, while the weather's clear." The ride to Bitter Creek the next morning was cold but uneventful. Clara wore her best dress, wrinkled but clean, and carried the reorganized ledger. Luke rode beside her, silent but present. The town looked different than it had 4 weeks ago. Or maybe Clara was different. She no longer felt like the desperate woman on the auction block. She'd worked, survived, proven herself. That changed everything. McCready's saloon was quiet in the late morning, just a few drinkers and the man himself behind the bar. He looked up when they entered, surprise crossing his face. "Luke, Mrs. Carver." The title sounded strange, but Clara didn't correct him. Legally, that's what she was. "Didn't expect to see you folks so soon." "We need to discuss the debt," Clara said directly. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" McCready studied her, then nodded. Back office. The office was small and cluttered, but Clara had worked in worse. She spread the ledger on the desk, opening to the pages she'd prepared. "Mr. McCready, you're currently owed $220 at 10% monthly interest. Luke has been making irregular payments, but can't keep pace with the interest accumulation. At the current rate, he'll never pay off the debt, which means eventually you'll get nothing." McCready's eyes narrowed. "I'll get the land." "Will you? Because if Luke defaults, he can claim bankruptcy under territorial law. You'd have to go through courts, legal fees, possibly get pennies on the dollar. And meanwhile, you're holding bad debt on your books that prevents you from lending to other customers." Clara could see she had his attention. "I'm proposing a restructuring," she continued. "Reduce the interest to 2% monthly, still 24% annually, still profitable for you. In exchange, we commit to fixed monthly payments of $15 starting in April after we sell cattle. The debt would be fully paid in 18 months, and you'd collect approximately $270 total, $50 profit plus your original principal." She turned the ledger to show him the calculations, clean and clear. McCready studied the numbers. "And if you don't make the payments? Then you still have recourse, but you'll have received more than you're getting now, and you'll have a functional relationship with a customer who'll need credit again in the future for growth and expansion." Luke sat silent, watching Clara work. This was her arena, and she commanded it. McCready leaned back. "You're a sharp woman, sharper than most who come through here. I'm a competent bookkeeper who understands that good debt management benefits both parties." "Why should I trust you'll make the payments?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "Because we've spent 4 weeks turning a dying ranch into a functional operation. Because we've done it through the hardest weather with minimal resources. Because we're not quitters, Mr. McCready. We're survivors. And survivors pay their debts because they understand reputation is the only currency that really matters." The silence stretched. Then McCready smiled, not warmly, but with respect. "All right, 2% monthly, $15 starting April, 18-month the term. But if you miss a payment, the original terms return." "Agreed." Clara offered her hand. McCready shook it, his grip firm. Outside, Luke helped Clara onto her horse, still looking stunned. "What you did in there," he started. "Was basic negotiation," Clara said. "He was holding bad debt. I gave him a way to turn it into good debt. Everyone wins." "You were incredible," Luke said simply. They rode home through the winter afternoon, and for the first time since coming to Montana, Clara felt something unfold in her chest. Not quite happiness, but close. Satisfaction, maybe. Pride in work well done. The ranch was still struggling. Winter was still brutal. They still had 100 problems and no guarantees. But they were moving forward, together. And that was enough. The success with McCready changed something between them, though neither spoke of it directly. That evening, as they worked together preparing supper, their movements had an easy rhythm that hadn't existed before. Luke chopped vegetables while Clara tended the stew, and when their hands brushed reaching for the same ladle, neither pulled away quickly. "You never told me where you learned to negotiate like that," Luke said, stirring the pot. "Philadelphia wasn't all ledgers and numbers," Clara replied, slicing bread with steady strokes. "I worked for merchants, shipping companies, men who built empires on handshakes and hard bargaining. You learn by watching, by listening to what people really want versus what they say they want." And McCready wanted security more than profit. Everyone wants security. Profit's just one way to get it. She set the bread on the table. "He's not a bad man, just practical. Give him a path to getting paid, and he'll take it." Luke ladled stew into bowls, and they sat down to eat. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin was warm, the fire crackling steadily. It felt, Clara thought, almost domestic, almost comfortable. "I've been thinking," Luke said after a while, "about spring, about what we do when the cattle are ready to sell." "We need to get top price," Clara said immediately, "which means good weight, healthy stock. We'll need to plan the drive to market carefully." "That's months away. I'm thinking about now, about winter." Luke set down his spoon. "The hay won't last. Even with rationing, we'll run out by February. Maybe sooner if we get more storms." Clara had already done the calculations, knew he was right. "What are the options?" "There's winter grass in the high valleys, protected areas where wind keeps the snow thin. If we could get the cattle there, they could forage. But it's a 3-day drive in good weather, and we'd have to keep them there, which means camping in the cold for weeks. Or," Clara could hear the unspoken alternative, "or we sell off the weakest cattle now, take whatever price we can get, reduce the herd to what we can actually feed through winter." The practical part of Clara's mind immediately began calculating. Fewer cattle meant less income in spring, but it also meant lower risk of losing them all. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. But it was also surrender, accepting that they couldn't handle the full herd, that their resources were too limited. "How many would we have to sell?" she asked. "Maybe 15 head. Keep only the breeding stock and strongest animals. That's a third of the herd." "I know." Luke's voice was heavy. "But it might be the difference between having a ranch in spring or having nothing." Clara stared at her bowl, thinking. The numbers made sense, but numbers weren't everything. She'd learned that in Philadelphia when Charles Whitmore's crimes had been laid bare in perfect accounting, and it hadn't mattered because power trumped truth. Sometimes you had to fight even when the math said you couldn't win. "The high valleys," she said slowly. "How dangerous is it really?" Luke looked at her carefully. "In good weather? Manageable. But Clara, it's December. We could get caught in a blizzard, lose the whole herd, or lose ourselves." "What about in sections? Move part of the herd, camp for a few days, come back for more." "That might work," Luke said, interest sparking in his eyes. "Split them into 2 groups. Move the stronger animals first, get them established, then come back for the rest." "And if we get caught in bad weather?" "We hole up, wait it out. It's risky, but—" He met her gaze. "But I think you already know what I'm going to say. That sometimes you have to risk everything to have any chance at all." Clara smiled, small but real. "Yes, I know that lesson." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Luke showed Clara how to pack supplies for extended cold weather camping, what gear they'd need, how to read the sky for storm signs. Clara organized the food supplies, calculated exactly how much they could spare without starving themselves. On the 4th day, they rode out to assess the cattle, choosing which animals would make the first journey. Clara was learning to read the herd now, to see which cows were hardy, which steers had the strength for hard travel. "These 12," Luke said finally, pointing out specific animals. "They're the strongest, most likely to handle the trip and the high country." They moved the selected cattle into a separate pen, then spent the evening checking and rechecking their supplies. 2 bedrolls, cooking gear, rifle and ammunition, rope, extra blankets, food enough for a week if they stretched it. "We leave at first light," Luke said that night. "Should reach the high valleys by the 3rd day if the weather holds." Clara nodded, trying not to show her nervousness. She'd never done anything like this. 3 days in open country in December, camping in the cold, driving cattle through mountain passes. It was insane. It was also necessary. She was packing her saddlebags when Luke spoke again, his voice quiet. "Clara, you don't have to come. I can do this alone, and you can hold things here. Partners," Clara interrupted firmly. "We agreed. Equal risk, equal work. I'm coming. It's going to be hard. Harder than anything we've done yet." "Good." Clara met his eyes. "I'm tired of things being easy." The ghost of a smile crossed Luke's face. "You're a strange woman, Clara Hartwell." "Clara Carver," she corrected without thinking, then stopped, surprised at herself. It was the first time she'd used his name as her own. Something shifted in Luke's expression. Surprise, pleasure, maybe something deeper. "Clara Carver," he repeated softly. "Yeah, I suppose that's right." They held each other's gaze for a moment too long, the air between them suddenly charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Clara turned back to her packing, and the moment passed. But it left something behind, some small seed of possibility. They rode out at dawn, the sky pale and cold, their breath and the horses forming clouds in the frozen air. The 12 cattle moved reluctantly at first, but Dancer and Red knew their work, and gradually the herd settled into a steady pace. The first day was brutal. The cold was relentless, and the cattle kept trying to turn back toward familiar ground. Clara's face went numb. Her hands ached despite thick gloves, and by afternoon her legs were screaming from hours in the saddle. But she didn't complain. She watched Luke, learned the rhythm of moving cattle over distance, and discovered she had reserves of strength she hadn't known existed. They camped that night in a shallow draw that offered some protection from wind. Luke built a small fire while Clara tended the horses and checked the cattle. The animals huddled together for warmth, their breath rising in clouds. Supper was hardtack, jerky, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. They ate quickly, conserving heat, then huddled close to the fire as darkness fell. "How's your first cattle drive?" Luke asked, his face flickering in the firelight. "Cold," Clara said honestly. "Exhausting. Harder than I imagined. Want to turn back?" "No." She pulled her blanket tighter. "How much further?" "Day and a half if we make good time tomorrow. The hard part's ahead. There's a pass we have to get through. It's narrow, rocky. Cattle don't like it. But on the other side?" "On the other side, there's valleys with grass and shelter. The cattle can winter there, and we can check on them every week or two." Luke poked the fire. "My father used to say the best grazing was always on the other side of the hardest trail." "Your father was a rancher?" "Farmer, Ohio. But he understood land and animals." Luke's voice softened. "He would have liked you, would have appreciated how you don't quit." Clara felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "My father would have liked you too. He valued honesty above everything. Said a man's word was worth more than his gold. Smart man." "He was, just not lucky." They fell into comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the distant sounds of cattle settling for the night. Above them, stars scattered across the black sky like scattered salt, bright and cold and impossibly distant. "I never asked," Luke said eventually, "about Philadelphia, about what you left behind besides the job." Claire considered how much to tell him. They'd shared some things, but this question probed deeper, touched places that still hurt. "There wasn't much to leave," she said finally. "No family, no real friends. The people I thought were friends disappeared the moment my reputation was destroyed. No home, just rented rooms. No prospects." She stared into the flames. "That's the thing about being a woman alone in the city. You exist at the mercy of others' good opinion. Lose that, and you lose everything. You had your skills, your knowledge, which meant nothing without reputation to back it. No one would hire me. No one would even listen. Clara's hands clenched. Charles Whitmore destroyed me methodically, efficiently. He had power, connections, money. I had truth. And truth without power is just noise. So you ran. I survived, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Running implies fear. I wasn't afraid. I was strategic. Philadelphia had nothing left for me, so I went where I might build something new. Even if it meant standing on an auction block. Even then, Clara looked at Luke directly. People think dignity means never compromising, never bending. But real dignity is doing whatever you must to survive and building yourself back up afterward. I stood on that block because the alternative was giving up. And I don't know how to do that. Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. For what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't give up. Glad you ended up here. Are you? Clara asked softly. I've complicated your life considerably. You've saved it, Luke said simply. The ranch was dying. I was dying with it. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. Then you showed up, and suddenly there was a reason to fight, a partner to fight with. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara felt her heart beating harder, felt the warmth of something dangerous and wonderful spreading through her chest. We should sleep, she said, her voice not quite steady. Long day tomorrow. Yeah. Luke banked the fire. Long day. They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining careful distance. But as Clara lay in the cold darkness, wrapped in blankets and listening to Luke's breathing slow into sleep, she found herself thinking about what he'd said. Partnership had seemed like a practical arrangement, two people cooperating for mutual survival. But somewhere along the way, between fixing fences and negotiating debts and driving cattle through snow, it had become something more. She wasn't sure what to call it yet. Wasn't sure she was ready to examine it too closely. But she knew it was there, this growing warmth between them, this sense of becoming something together that neither could be alone. Clara fell asleep thinking about silver dollars and auction blocks, and the strange paths that led broken people toward healing. The second day was harder. They climbed steadily upward, the cattle struggling on the rocky terrain. The pass Luke had mentioned appeared around noon, a narrow gap between two rocky ridges, barely wide enough for the cattle to move through single file. This is it, Luke said, studying the approach. We have to push them through fast. If they balk, they'll pile up and panic. Getting 12 reluctant cattle through a narrow mountain pass turned out to be the hardest work Clara had ever done. The animals sensed the danger, felt the rock walls pressing close, and fought every step. Clara and Luke worked in desperate tandem, pushing, guiding, sometimes physically shoving stubborn steers forward. Halfway through, one of the cows decided she'd had enough and tried to turn back. The narrow space meant she blocked the others, and suddenly cattle were pushing in both directions, bellowing and wild-eyed. Clara, block the rear, Luke shouted. Don't let them back up. Clara spurred Dancer forward, using the horse to physically block the retreat. The cattle pressed against them, and for a terrifying moment, Clara thought they might push her and the horse right over the edge of the trail. But Dancer held steady, and Clara shouted and waved her arms, making herself as large and threatening as possible. Slowly, reluctantly, the cattle turned forward again. Luke had the lead cow moving, and where she went, the others followed. One by one, they squeezed through the narrowest part of the pass, and then suddenly they were through, emerging onto a broader trail that led downward into a sheltered valley. Clara slumped in the saddle, shaking with exhaustion and relief. Luke rode back to her, his face flushed with effort. You all right? I thought we were going over the edge, Clara admitted. So did I. But you held. Luke's smile was genuine, proud. You held, and we made it. They descended into the valley as the sun dropped toward the western peaks. And when Clara saw what lay below, she understood why Luke had been willing to risk the pass. The valley was perfect, protected on three sides by rocky ridges, watered by a stream that ran unfrozen in the center, carpeted with winter grass that the wind had kept mostly clear of snow. The cattle saw it too and picked up their pace, eager to reach the grazing. This is it, Luke said, satisfaction in his voice. They'll be good here. They made camp at the valley's edge, and that night the mood was lighter despite the exhaustion. The cattle grazed peacefully, the weather held clear, and they'd accomplished what they set out to do. One more trip, Clara said as they ate. Bring the rest of the herd up, and we'll have enough hay at the ranch to feed what's left. If the weather holds, Luke cautioned, we got lucky this time. Then we'll get lucky again. Clara refused to consider the alternative. They stayed in the valley one more day, making sure the cattle were settled, then began the journey back. The return trip was faster without cattle to move, but harder in its own way. Claire's body ached in places she hadn't known existed, and the cold seemed to penetrate deeper with each passing hour. But they made it back to the ranch late on the third day, cold and exhausted but triumphant. The cabin had never looked so welcoming. Clara practically fell through the door, desperate for warmth. Luke got the fire roaring while she collapsed at the table, too tired to even remove her coat. Real food tomorrow, Luke promised, stoking the fire higher. Tonight it's just coffee and whatever we can manage without falling asleep in the pot. They barely managed coffee. Clara stumbled to her bedroom and collapsed fully clothed on the bed, asleep before she could even pull the blankets over herself. She woke to Luke gently shaking her shoulder, his face concerned in the lamplight. Clara, you need to get under the covers. You'll freeze like this. She was too exhausted to argue. Let him help her out of her coat and boots, tuck the blankets around her like she was a child. His hands were gentle, careful, and through her exhaustion, Clara felt a rush of gratitude and something warmer. Thank you, she mumbled. Sleep, Luke said softly. We made it. We're home. Home. The word echoed in Clara's mind as she drifted back into sleep. Yes, this rough cabin, this struggling ranch, this impossible partnership. Home. They rested for 2 days before attempting the second trip. Clara's body needed the recovery time, and Luke used it to check the remaining cattle, repair equipment, and plan their route. On the morning of the third day, Clara found Luke at the corral, staring at the cattle with a frown. What's wrong? Not sure. Something's off with them. They're restless, nervous. Clara studied the animals. Luke was right. They were moving oddly, bunching together, ears swiveling at every sound. Maybe they smell a predator? She suggested. Maybe. But Luke didn't sound convinced. They decided to wait another day, watch the cattle, make sure nothing was wrong before attempting the second drive. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Clara noticed Luke kept getting up to look out the window. What is it? She asked finally. I don't know, just a feeling. He sat back down, restless. Something's not right. Clara was about to tell him he was imagining things when they both heard it, the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Luke was on his feet instantly, hand on the rifle that hung above the door. Stay inside. He stepped out onto the porch, and Clara moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. A single rider approached, a big man on a bigger horse, moving with the confidence of someone who owned whatever ground he crossed. He pulled up 20 feet from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to stay out of easy rifle range. Luke Carver, the man called out, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. Been meaning to pay you a visit. Grant Weller, Luke said, and Clara heard the tension in his voice. What brings you out here? Neighborly concern. Weller smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Heard you were having a hard winter. Thought I'd check in, see how you're managing. Managing fine. That's good. That's real good. Weller's eyes scanned the property, the lean cattle, the worn buildings, the obvious signs of struggle. Though I got to say, place looks rough. Might be this land's too much for one man to handle. I'm not one man anymore, Luke said evenly. Got a partner now? Oh, I heard about that too. The auction bride. Weller's smile widened. Whole territory's talking about how Luke Carver paid $2 for a woman. That's quite a bargain. Clara felt anger flash through her, but she stayed quiet, watching. My wife's name is Clara, Luke said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, and she's worth more than everything you own. Is that so? Weller leaned forward in his saddle. Well, here's the thing, Luke. I've been expanding my operation, bought out 3 ranches this year, Collins, the Martin Place, that spread down by Willow Creek. I'm building something real, something permanent, and this valley here, it'd fit real nice into my plans. This valley's not for sale. Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. Weller's tone stayed pleasant, but Clara could hear the steel underneath. I'm prepared to offer you a fair deal, $500 for the land, buildings, and cattle. That's more than this place is worth in your hands. Not interested. Think about it, Luke. $500, cash money. That's enough to pay off your debts, buy passage anywhere you want, start fresh. You and your partner. Clara saw Luke's hands tighten on the rifle. I said no, Grant. This is my land, my home, and it's staying that way. Weller's pleasant expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. That's disappointing. I was hoping we could do this the easy way. There is no easy way. There's just no. We'll see. Weller gathered his reins. You think about my offer, Luke. Think real careful. Winter's long and a lot can happen. Would be a shame if you lost everything because you were too proud to accept a fair deal. He wheeled his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Luke stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then came back inside. Clara was already at the table, her mind racing. He's going to try something. I know. Luke set the rifle down carefully. Grant Weller doesn't make offers and then walk away when they're refused. He's a collector, land, cattle, power, and he doesn't like hearing no. What can he do? The land's legally yours? Plenty. Drive our cattle off. Spread rumors we're stealing stock. Make it impossible for us to sell or buy supplies. Luke sat down heavily. Or worse. Worse how? Grant's been known to play rough when he wants something. Buildings catch fire. Cattle disappear. People get hurt. Luke met her eyes. He's dangerous, Clara. Really dangerous. And now he's interested in this place. Clara felt ice form in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. Then we need to be more careful. Watch the herd closely. Protect what's ours. You're not afraid? I'm terrified, Clara admitted. But I've dealt with powerful men before. They all have the same weakness. They expect you to fold when they threaten you, so the trick is not folding. Luke studied her in the firelight. Charles Whitmore taught you that? He taught me that power without law behind it is just bullying, and bullies back down when you refuse to be intimidated. Clara's jaw set. We have legal title to this land. We have contracts with McCready. We have witnesses to Weller's threat. He can't just take what he wants. In theory, Luke said, in practice, out here, might often makes right. Then we'll have to be smart and strong. Clara reached across the table, placing her hand on Luke's. Together, like we've been doing. Luke turned his hand over, his calloused palm against hers. The touch sent warmth spreading up Clara's arm, settled somewhere in the region of her heart. Together, he agreed quietly. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, both understanding that something had changed. Weller's threat had shifted the equation. What had started as a practical partnership, evolved into friendship, was becoming something deeper, something worth fighting for. The night after Weller's visit, neither of them slept well. Clara lay awake listening to Luke moving restlessly in the main room, stoking the fire, checking the windows. Every sound outside, wind creaking the barn, an animal moving in the darkness, made her tense, wondering if trouble had arrived. Morning came cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Luke was already up when Clara emerged from the bedroom, his face drawn with exhaustion. We need to move the rest of the cattle today, he said without preamble. I don't like them being this close to the ranch, too vulnerable. Clara understood what he wasn't saying, too easy for Weller to scatter or steal. The weather looks bad. I know, but we don't have a choice anymore. Luke was checking supplies, his movements sharp with tension. We'll move fast, get them to the valley, and come straight back. They worked quickly, gathering the remaining cattle, about 20 head, and pushing them north. The animals were reluctant, sensing the coming storm, but Clara and Luke were relentless. They couldn't afford delay. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall. By the time they reached the pass, it was snowing steadily, visibility dropping. The cattle balked at the narrow gap, and precious time was lost, forcing them through. Clara's world narrowed to the immediate task. Keep the cattle moving. Stay in the saddle. Don't think about the cold seeping through every layer of clothing. Luke rode ahead, breaking trail, while she brought up the rear, pushing stragglers forward. They reached the valley as darkness fell, the storm intensifying. The cattle joined the first group, and Luke quickly counted heads in the swirling snow. "All here!" he shouted over the wind. "We need to make camp. Wait this out." But when they tried to set up camp, they discovered their supplies had gotten wet during the crossing of a half-frozen stream. The blankets were soaked, the matches damp, and the cold was becoming dangerous. "We can't stay here," Clara said, her teeth chattering. "We'll freeze." Luke looked torn, studying the storm, the darkness, the treacherous pass they'd have to navigate. Going back in these conditions was insane. Staying might be fatal. "There's a line shack," he said finally. "Old hunting cabin about 2 miles east. It's rough, but it's shelter." They rode through the storm, Clara following Red's dark shape through the whiteout. Her hands were numb on the reins, her face felt frozen, and she'd lost feeling in her feet entirely. The world became just cold and darkness and the desperate need to keep moving. When the cabin appeared, barely more than a dark shape against darker night, Clara nearly cried with relief. Luke dismounted, forced the door open, and pulled Clara down from Dancer. She stumbled, her legs not working properly, and he caught her, half-carried her inside. The cabin was tiny. One room with a stone fireplace, a rough bunk, nothing else. But it was out of the wind, and that was everything. Luke got Clara onto the bunk, then went back for the horses, bringing them right up to the cabin door where they'd have some protection from the storm. When he came back inside, his face was white with cold. "Need fire," he said through chattering teeth. "Gotta get warm." But the wood inside the cabin was damp, and the matches were wet. Luke tried 3, 4, 5 times to get a flame going, his frozen fingers fumbling. "Let me," Clara said, forcing herself to move despite the cold. She'd learned a trick from a housekeeper years ago, using frayed cloth as tinder, building a tiny structure that would catch from even a weak flame. On the 7th match, a small flame caught. Clara fed it carefully, adding the driest splinters she could find, coaxing it larger. Luke helped, and slowly, painfully slowly, they built a fire. The warmth was exquisite and agonizing all at once as frozen skin began to thaw. Clara huddled close to the flames, shaking violently. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Luke said. "Hypothermia kills faster than cold." It was practical advice, medical necessity, but it created an awkward moment. Clara and Luke had maintained careful boundaries for months, separate sleeping spaces, respectful distance. But survival didn't care about propriety. "Turn around," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I'll change first." Luke turned his back, facing the wall, while Clara struggled out of her wet dress and undergarments with numb fingers. She wrapped herself in her coat, still damp but drier than everything else, and pulled one of the wet blankets around her shoulders. "Your turn," she said, moving to face the fire. She heard Luke changing behind her, the rustle of fabric, his harsh breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was closer. "We're going to have to share warmth. The blankets are too wet and the fire's not enough." Clara knew he was right. She'd read enough about frontier survival to know that body heat could mean the difference between life and death in extreme cold. But the thought of it, of being that close to Luke, with nothing but wet fabric between them, made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. "All right," she said quietly. They arranged themselves on the narrow bunk, backs to the fire, Clara in front with Luke behind her, the damp blankets pulled over both of them. Luke's arms came around her hesitantly, and Clara could feel him shaking as hard as she was. At first it was just cold and discomfort, but gradually, slowly, their combined heat began to build under the blankets. The shaking lessened, feeling returned to Clara's fingers and toes with painful prickling, and she became acutely aware of Luke's body pressed against hers, his chest against her back, his breath on her neck, his arms holding her close. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, could feel the tension in his muscles, the careful way he held her like she was something precious that might break. "Clara," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something. While we're here, while I can." "What is it?" "When I put those $2 down, I told myself it was practical, just business, a solution to a problem." His arms tightened slightly. But that was a lie. From the moment I saw you on that platform, the way you stood there refusing to break, the fire in your eyes even when everyone was laughing, I knew you were extraordinary. I knew I was watching someone who'd been beaten down by life and was still standing. Claire's heart hammered in her chest. Luke, let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. These months working with you, watching you refuse to quit, watching you save Bess and negotiate with McCready and drive cattle through mountain passes without complaint. Clara, you're the strongest person I've ever known. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being a partnership and started being something else. Clara turned in his arms, needing to see his face. In the firelight, his features were soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. What kind of something else? She whispered. The kind where I wake up thinking about you, where I look forward to coffee in the morning just because we drink it together, where the idea of Grant Weller threatening you makes me want to burn his ranch to the ground. Luke's hand came up, gently touching her face. The kind where I'm falling in love with you and I don't know how to stop, don't even want to stop. The words hung between them, impossibly honest, terrifyingly real. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, not from cold, but from the sudden overwhelming emotion of being seen, being valued, being loved. You're not supposed to love me, she said, her voice breaking. I'm the woman nobody wanted. The one you bought for pocket change because no one else would bid. You're the woman who saved my life and my ranch and gave me a reason to keep fighting, Luke corrected fiercely. You're brilliant and brave and beautiful, and if the rest of the world was too blind to see it, that's their loss and my extraordinary luck. Clara couldn't speak. She'd built walls around her heart in Philadelphia, brick by brick, insult by insult, until she'd thought nothing could reach her anymore. But Luke's words were sledgehammers, shattering those defenses. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to let someone in. Everyone I've trusted has either died or betrayed me. Then don't trust me yet, Luke said simply. Just give me the chance to earn it. Let me show you that not everyone leaves, that some people stay. The storm howled outside, but in the tiny cabin, wrapped in Luke's arms, Clara felt something crack open inside her, something scared and hopeful and desperately wanting to believe. I'm afraid, she whispered. So am I. Luke's thumb traced her cheekbone. But I'm more afraid of never taking the chance, of wondering what might have been. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she felt reflected in his eyes. The fear and hope and desperate longing, the willingness to be vulnerable despite the risk. And she made a choice. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was tentative at first, questioning, but Luke responded with a gentleness that made Clara's heart ache. His hand cupped her face, his lips warm against hers, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after years of being lost. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you negotiated with McCready, he admitted. Watching you work, seeing how strong and smart you are, it was all I could do not to kiss you right there in his office. Clara laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. I've wanted it since you told Grant Weller I was worth more than everything he owned. No one's ever defended me like that. I'll defend you against anyone, Luke promised. I'll stand between you and the whole world if I have to. They held each other as the storm raged and the fire slowly died to embers. Eventually they slept, exhausted from cold and emotion, wrapped together on the narrow bunk. Clara woke once in the darkness, disoriented, and felt Luke's arms tighten around her. It's all right, he murmured. I've got you. Sleep. She did, feeling safer than she had in years. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed by snow. Clara and Luke emerged from the cabin to find everything buried under fresh powder, the air crystalline and still. Storm's past, Luke said, studying the sky. We should head back before another one comes. They checked the cattle, all accounted for, grouped in the sheltered areas, then began the journey home. The ride was quiet, but not with the strained silence of strangers. This was the comfortable quiet of two people who'd crossed a threshold and were still adjusting to the new landscape. As they descended from the high country, Clara felt Luke's hand find hers. They rode like that for a while, gloved fingers intertwined, until the practical need to control the horses required both hands. But the connection remained. They reached the ranch in late afternoon, and Luke pulled up short, his whole body going tense. "What?" Clara asked. Then she saw it. The gate to the main corral stood wide open. The few cattle they'd left behind, the milk cows and 2 older steers too weak to move, were gone. And in the snow, clear as a signature, were the tracks of multiple horses. Luke dismounted slowly, studying the scene with a tracker's eye. 5 riders, maybe 6, came in from the east, drove the cattle out to the west. This happened last night during the storm. "Weller," Clara said, cold fury replacing the warmth she'd felt moments before. "Probably, or men working for him." Luke's jaw was tight. They knew we'd be gone, knew the storm would cover their tracks within hours. Clara climbed down from Dancer, her mind already working through implications. "We have 6 cows and steers missing. How much are they worth?" "Maybe $150, but it's not about the money." Luke's eyes were hard. "It's about sending a message, showing us we're vulnerable, making us afraid." "Then he misjudged us," Clara said flatly, "because I'm not afraid. I'm angry." She strode into this cabin, Luke following. Inside, everything was as they'd left it, untouched, undisturbed, but the violation of having their stock stolen felt personal, invasive. Clara paced the small space, her strategic mind working. "We need evidence, proof that Weller took our cattle. We have tracks, but they'll be gone in a day or 2. Then we follow them now, see where they lead." "Clara, I know it's dangerous. I know Weller's powerful and we're just 2 people trying to survive, but I won't let him terrorize us into selling." She spun to face Luke. "I've run before, from Philadelphia, from Charles Whitmore's lies. I won't run again, not from this, not when I finally have something worth fighting for." Luke crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her close, kissed her hard. When he released her, his eyes were blazing. "We fight," he said, "together. But we're smart about it. We don't go off half-cocked and get ourselves killed." "Agreed. So what's the smart play?" Luke thought for a moment. "We follow the tracks, but carefully. See if they lead to Weller's ranch. If they do, we go to the territorial marshal in Helena. Report the theft officially." "Will he do anything?" "Maybe, especially if we have evidence." Luke grabbed his coat. "But we need to move now before the tracks are completely gone." They rode out within the hour, following the trail west. The tracks were clear at first, 5 horses, 6 cattle, moving at a steady pace. But as they rode, the trail became harder to follow. Wind had scoured some areas, snow had drifted in others. They tracked for 3 hours, pushing deeper into territory Clara didn't recognize. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when Luke pulled up at the top of a ridge. "Look," he said quietly. Below them, spread across a broad valley, was Grant Weller's ranch, and in a corral near the main barn, clearly visible even from a distance, were 6 cattle that looked very familiar. "There," Clara breathed. "That's our stock." "Looks like it, but looks aren't proof." Luke studied the layout. "We need to get closer, confirm it's them. See if they still have my brand. That's dangerous. If Weller catches us on his land, I know, but it's the only way." Luke squeezed her hand. "You stay here. I'll go down, get close enough to check the brands. Come back." "Absolutely not," Clara said immediately. "We go together. Partners, remember?" Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara's expression left no room for debate. He nodded reluctantly. They approached carefully, using the terrain for cover, tying the horses a quarter-mile out and continuing on foot. The snow muffled their steps as they crept closer to the corral. The cattle were there, huddled together against the evening cold. Luke pulled out a small spyglass, studying them. "That's them," he said grimly. "I can see my brand. And they've already started rebranding. There's Weller's mark partially burned over mine on the spotted cow." "That's illegal," Clara said. "Altering another man's brand is a hanging offense in Montana." "It is, but we still need to prove these are our cattle, not ones he legitimately bought." They were backing away, preparing to retreat, when a voice called out from behind them. "Well, well, look what wandered onto my land." Clara and Luke spun. Grant Weller stood 20 feet away, flanked by 2 ranch hands with rifles. His smile was cold and satisfied. "That's close enough," Weller said as Luke's hand moved toward his gun. "My boys here are excellent shots. Be a shame if there was an accident. Those are our cattle, Luke said, his voice level despite the danger. You stole them during the storm. Stole? That's a serious accusation. Weller's smile widened. I bought these cattle fair and square from a man passing through. Got a bill of sale and everything.
Forged, no doubt, Clara said. Careful, Mrs. Carver. That's slander. Weller's eyes were hard despite his pleasant tone. You two are trespassing on my land, making false accusations. That could go badly for you. We saw your men's tracks, Luke said, leading straight from my ranch to yours. Tracks in the snow? Could be anyone's. Could be rustlers who stole from both of us. Weller shrugged. Or could be you're confused. Winter does strange things to a man's mind. Clara felt rage building in her chest. This man was standing in front of them, smiling, while 6 stolen cattle stood in his corral with altered brands. And he knew they couldn't prove it, knew he had the power, and they had nothing. Make you a deal, Weller said conversationally. Forget about these cattle. Forget about your little ranch. Take my original offer, $500 for everything. Walk away clean, and we'll call all this a misunderstanding. No, Luke said flatly. Think carefully, son. Winter's hard, accidents happen. Cattle get sick, buildings catch fire. People get hurt in storms. Weller's pleasant tone never wavered, but the threat was unmistakable. Be a shame if something happened to you or your wife because you were too stubborn to accept a fair offer. Clara saw Luke's hand clench, saw the fury in his eyes, and knew he was calculating whether he could draw his gun before Weller's men could shoot. Luke, she said quietly, touching his arm, not like this. He looked at her, and she saw the war in his expression, the desperate need to fight versus the knowledge that dying here wouldn't save the ranch. Smart woman, Weller said. You should listen to her. Now, I'm going to give you to the count of 10 to get off my land. After that, my boys will assume you're here to steal my stock, and they'll act accordingly. This isn't over, Luke said, his voice low and dangerous. It's over when I say it's over. 1, 2, 3. Clara pulled Luke backward, and they retreated, never turning their backs on Weller and his men. When they reached the cover of the ridge, they ran for the horses. They didn't stop riding until they were well clear of Weller's land, both of them shaking with adrenaline and fury. He stole our cattle, Luke said, his voice raw. Right in front of us, and there's nothing we can do. There's always something we can do, Clara said, though her mind was racing through and discarding options. Go to the marshal, but with what proof? Fight Weller directly. But he had more men, more guns, more everything. They rode home in bitter silence as darkness fell. The cabin felt cold despite the fire, violated by the theft, even though nothing inside had been touched. Luke paced like a caged animal, while Clara sat at the table thinking. The strategic part of her mind, the part that had untangled complex finances and found patterns in chaos, worked through the problem systematically. He's going to keep pushing, she said finally, taking our stock, making our lives difficult until we either sell or fail, and legally, we can't touch him because he has money and connections, and we have nothing but our word. So what do we do? Luke asked, frustration making his voice sharp. Clara looked up at him, and in her eyes was the same fire that had sustained her through Philadelphia's worst. We make him overplay his hand. We make him so confident he's won that he gets sloppy, and then we use that against him. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Clara stood, moved to Luke, took his hands. I promise you, I'll figure it out. Because I'm not losing this. Not the ranch. Not our future. Not what we're building together. Luke pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I can't lose you, he said roughly. If something happened to you because of this, nothing's going to happen to me, or to you, or to the ranch. Clara pulled back, framed his face with her hands. We're going to win, Luke. I don't know how yet, but we're going to win. Because we're smarter and tougher than Grant Weller gives us credit for, and because we have something he doesn't. What's that? Each other. A real partnership. Something worth fighting for. She kissed him softly. That's more powerful than all his money, and men combined. Luke held her close, and they stood like that in the firelight, 2 people against the world, scared but determined. Outside,
The Montana winter pressed close, and somewhere in the darkness, Grant Weller sat in his comfortable ranch house, counting other people's property and planning his next move. But in the small cabin, Clara's mind was already working, already planning, already searching for the weakness that every powerful man had. She'd beaten Charles Whitmore by documenting the truth. She'd survived the auction by refusing to break. She'd saved the ranch by being smarter and working harder than anyone expected. And she'd find a way to beat Grant Weller too. Because that's what survivors did. They adapted, they fought, they won. The next morning brought a bitter cold that seeped through every crack in the cabin. Clara woke to find Luke already up, staring out the window at a world locked in ice. "We need supplies," he said without turning. "And we need to let people in town know what happened. Start building a record, even if we can't prove anything yet." "Agreed. But we go together." "Clara, don't." She stood, moved to him. "Don't try to protect me by keeping me here. We're stronger together. We face this together." Luke searched her face, then nodded. "Together." They rode to Bitter Creek in the freezing morning, and when they entered McCready's saloon, the room went quiet. News traveled fast in small territories, and Clara could see in the faces around them that people knew. Knew about the missing cattle, knew about the confrontation at Weller's ranch, knew they were watching two people slowly losing a fight against power. But Clara held her head high as she walked to the bar, Luke beside her. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. "McCready," she said clearly, "we need to report a theft. 6 head of cattle stolen from our ranch 2 nights ago during the storm." McCready's expression was carefully neutral. "That's a matter for the territorial marshal, not a saloon keeper. You're also the town commissioner, and you keep records. I want it documented officially that on this date we reported the theft." Slowly, reluctantly, McCready nodded. "I'll make a note in the town records." "Thank you." Clara turned to address the room at large. "I also want witnesses. Everyone here should know. Grant Weller stole our stock and is trying to force us off our land through intimidation and theft. We won't be intimidated, we won't sell, and we won't forget who stood by and watched it happen." The room stayed silent, but Clara saw shifting eyes, uncomfortable expressions. "Good. Let them think about it. Let them wonder where they'd stand when this was over." She and Luke bought supplies, putting them on credit that McCready extended without comment, and prepared to leave. As they loaded the wagon, a man approached. He was older, weathered, wearing the clothes of a working rancher. "Name's Tom Brennan," he said quietly. "I heard what you said in there. About Weller." "And?" Luke asked warily. "He did the same to me 2 years back. Stole my stock, burned my barn, made life hell until I sold to him for half what my place was worth." Brennan's jaw was tight. "I should have fought. But I was alone, and I was scared. I've regretted it every day since." "Why are you telling us this?" Clara asked. "Because you're not alone. And because maybe if enough people refuse to back down, Weller's hold on this territory breaks." Brennan handed Luke a slip of paper. "That's where I'm staying. If you need a witness, someone to testify about his methods, you let me know." He walked away before they could respond. Luke and Clara looked at each other, and Clara felt the first spark of real hope since the theft. "He's afraid," she said. "Weller. That's why he's pushing so hard, so fast. He's afraid we might actually succeed. Might show everyone that he can be beaten." "Or he's just a bully who likes crushing people," Luke said. "Maybe. But bullies are always afraid underneath." Clara climbed onto the wagon. "And fear makes people sloppy. We just have to be patient, be ready, and wait for him to make a mistake." They drove home through the cold, and Clara's mind was already turning over possibilities, searching for angles, looking for the weakness in Weller's armor. She'd find it. She always did. Because in the end, the most dangerous person in any fight wasn't the one with the most power. It was the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The winter deepened, and with it came a waiting game that tested every reserve of patience Clara and Luke possessed. They checked the High Valley cattle twice weekly, enduring brutal cold and treacherous trails, but the herd remained safe. At the ranch, they fortified what they could, repaired fences, kept watch and shifts at night, documented every strange occurrence in Clara's meticulous ledger. But Weller made no more moves. No more stolen stock, no more threats. Just silence, which was somehow worse than action. "He's waiting for us to drop our guard," Clara said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Or waiting for Winter to do his work for him." "Maybe he's given up," Luke suggested without conviction. "Men like Grant Weller don't give up. They just change tactics." Clara stared into the flames, thinking, "We're missing something. Some angle he's working that we haven't seen yet." The answer came 3 weeks later, delivered by a nervous clerk from the Territorial Land Office in Helena. Luke and Clara were mending tack in the barn when they heard a horse approaching. The rider was young, barely 20, wearing a suit too thin for the weather and an expression of profound discomfort. "Mr. Carver? Mrs. Carver?" He dismounted awkwardly. "I'm Jeffrey Pittman from the Territorial Land Office. I need to speak with you about your property claim." Clara felt ice form in her stomach. "What about it?" Pittman pulled papers from his saddlebag with shaking hands. "There's been a challenge filed to your land title. A Mr. Grant Weller claims that your original claim was improperly filed and that the land should be available for new claims. There's a hearing scheduled in Helena in 2 weeks." Luke took the papers, his face going pale as he read. "This is insane. I filed properly 5 years ago. I have witnesses, documentation." "I'm sure you do, sir. But the challenge has been filed according to territorial law, and you're required to appear and defend your claim. If you don't appear, or if the judge rules against you, your title will be voided and the land will go to public auction." "Public auction where Weller will be the only bidder," Clara said flatly. Pittman wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm just delivering notice, ma'am. The hearing is February 14th at 9 in the morning." He remounted quickly. "I'm sorry. I truly am." He rode away, leaving Luke and Clara standing in the cold, holding papers that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. "This is it," Luke said, his voice hollow. "This is how he wins. Not with theft or intimidation, but with legal maneuvering. Even if my claim was perfect, which it was, he's got lawyers and judges in his pocket. We can't fight that." Clara read through the papers carefully, her bookkeeper's mind analyzing every word. The challenge claimed that Luke's original filing had missing signatures, that boundary markers were improperly placed, that witnesses couldn't be verified. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction, each claim just plausible enough to require refutation. "We need a lawyer," she said. We can't afford a lawyer. And even if we could, what lawyer in Montana would go against Grant Weller?" Clara's mind raced through possibilities, discarding each one. Luke was right. They had no money for legal help, and Weller's influence extended throughout the territory. Going to Helena without representation would be walking into an ambush, unless they changed the rules of the fight. "We don't need a lawyer," Clara said slowly, an idea forming. "We need witnesses. People who were there when you filed, who saw the original claim, who can testify to the legitimacy of your title. Most of those people are dead or gone. The old land agent died 2 years ago. The surveyor moved to California. Then we find the ones who remain. And we find others Weller has cheated. Tom Brennan said he'd testify. There must be others." Claire's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape. "Weller's been building his empire for years. He's left a trail of victims. What if we bring them all to that hearing? Present not just a defense of our claim, but a pattern of fraud and intimidation?" Luke stared at her. "That's dangerous. Weller won't just let us parade his crimes in front of a judge. So we do it carefully, quietly. We find people, document their stories, build a case that's impossible to ignore." Clara grabbed his hands. "Luke, this is what I do. What I did in Philadelphia. I found the pattern in Whitmore's fraud, built the documentation. I can do it again." "Whitmore had you destroyed for that." "Whitmore won because I was alone and he had all the power. But we're not alone. We have each other, and we have truth on our side. Sometimes that's enough." Luke searched her face, and Clara saw the moment he decided to trust her, to believe they could win. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need." They spent the next week riding across the territory in brutal cold, tracking down everyone who'd had dealings with Grant Weller. It was exhausting, dangerous work. Some people slammed doors in their faces, too afraid to speak. Others talked, but refused to testify, unwilling to put their names to accusations. But slowly, carefully, Clara built her case. Tom Brennan agreed to testify about Weller stealing his stock and burning his barn. A widow named Sarah Mitchell described how Weller had forced her to sell her late husband's ranch for a fraction of its value after mysterious fires destroyed her hay stores. A former ranch hand named Pete Dawson told how Weller had ordered him to alter brands on stolen cattle, then fired him when he objected. Clara documented everything in her ledger: names, dates, specific incidents. She cross-referenced stories, found corroborating details, built a timeline that showed years of systematic fraud and intimidation. "It's not just about our land," she explained to Luke as they reviewed the evidence one night. "It's about showing that Grant Weller is a criminal who's been using legal processes to steal from honest people. Once the judge sees the pattern, he can't ignore it. Even if Weller has influence, there's a limit to what judges will overlook when the evidence is this clear. And if the judge is in Weller's pocket, then we make sure the hearing is public and well attended. Get newspaper reporters there. Make it impossible for the judge to rule for Weller without destroying his own reputation." Clara's eyes were fierce. "We turned this into the trial Grant Weller didn't expect to face." Luke pulled her close, kissed her hard. "You're brilliant and terrifying, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Clara felt warmth flood through her despite the cold cabin. "I love you too. And I'm not losing this. Not our land, not our future, not what we've built." The night before they were scheduled to leave for Helena, Clara was packing their few good clothes when she heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving fast. Luke grabbed his rifle and went to the door. Clara followed, her heart hammering. But it wasn't Weller's men. It was Tom Brennan, Sarah Mitchell, Pete Dawson, and 5 other people Clara had interviewed. They sat on their horses in the cold darkness, and Tom called out, "We heard you're going to Helena tomorrow, to fight Weller in court." "That's right," Luke said warily. "Then you're not going alone." Tom dismounted. "We talked about it, all of us. Figured if we're going to testify against him anyway, we might as well ride together. Safety in numbers." Sarah Mitchell climbed down from her wagon. "I brought my husband's papers, original deed, sale documents, everything, in case it helps." One by one, the others came forward, offering documents, testimony, support. Clara felt tears sting her eyes as she realized what they were doing. These people, who'd been beaten down and scattered by Weller's greed, were coming together to fight back. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you, thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Pete Dawson said grimly. "Thank us when we win." They made camp in the barn that night, a ragged group of Weller's victims preparing for battle. Clara moved among them, reviewing testimony, answering questions, building courage. Luke organized the logistics: who would ride in which order, what route they'd take, how they'd handle trouble if it came. In the quiet hours before dawn, Clara and Luke stood together outside the barn, looking at the stars. "This is it," Luke said quietly. "Win or lose, after tomorrow everything changes." "We're going to win," Clara said with certainty she almost believed, "because we have something Weller doesn't understand. We have people who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's more powerful than money or influence." Luke turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. These months with you, they've been the best of my life. You've given me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, love when I thought I'd spend my life alone. Even if we lose the ranch, we'll still have each other, and that's enough." Clara kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, love and fear and fierce determination. "We're not losing the ranch, or each other, or anything else. I'm done losing, Luke. It's time we started winning." They rode out at dawn, a caravan of 9 people traveling through the frozen landscape toward Helena and the hearing that would decide everything. The journey took 2 hard days, and they arrived in the territorial capital with barely an hour to spare before the hearing. Helena was larger than Bitter Creek, a real city with brick buildings, paved streets, and the bustle of commerce and government. The courthouse was an imposing structure of stone and timber, and as their group approached, Clara saw Grant Weller standing on the steps with 2 well-dressed men she assumed were his lawyers. Weller's expression when he saw their group was priceless: shock, then fury, then a carefully constructed mask of confidence. But Clara had seen the first reaction, and it told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't expected them to fight back with numbers and documentation. Hadn't expected his victims to band together. Good. Let him be surprised. Let him scramble to adjust. The courtroom was already half full when they entered. Clara spotted what looked like newspaper reporters, local business owners, people drawn by the spectacle of a land dispute. She caught the eye of a young man with a notebook and gave him a slight nod. He nodded back, pen poised. The judge entered, a stern-faced man in his 50s named Judge Harrison, and called the hearing to order. Weller's lawyer stood first, a silver-haired man named Caldwell, who presented the challenge to Luke's claim with smooth confidence. He laid out the supposed deficiencies in the original filing, presented documents that claimed to show irregularities, and suggested that the land should be made available for proper claiming. It was a masterful performance, and Clara felt her stomach clench as she watched Judge Harrison's impassive face. Then it was their turn. Luke stood, and Clara was struck by how different he looked from the desperate man who'd put $2 on an auction block 4 months ago. He stood straight, spoke clearly, and presented his original claim documents with quiet confidence. Your Honor, my claim was properly filed in March of 1868. I have the original documents, signed by land agent William Foster and surveyed by Thomas Grant. I have letters from neighbors confirming the boundary markers, and I have 5 years of continuous occupation and improvement. Caldwell stood smoothly. Mr. Foster is dead, Your Honor. Mr. Grant has left the territory. The supposed neighbors can't be verified. I can verify them, Tom Brennan said, standing. I was one of the neighbors. I remember when Luke filed his claim, helped him set the markers myself. Caldwell's smile tightened. And how much is Mr. Carver paying you to say that? Nothing. I'm here because I'm tired of watching Grant Weller steal from honest people. Judge Harrison held up a hand. Let's maintain order. Mr. Brennan, you'll have a chance to speak formally. Clara stood then, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Your Honor, if I may, I'm Clara Carver, and I've served as bookkeeper and land manager for my husband's ranch. I'd like to present evidence that this challenge is part of a pattern of fraud and intimidation by Mr. Weller. Caldwell was on his feet immediately. Objection! This hearing is about the validity of a land claim, not wild accusations. It's directly relevant, Clara interrupted. If Mr. Weller has a history of filing false challenges to force people off their land, it speaks to the legitimacy of this challenge. Judge Harrison studied her thoughtfully. I'll allow it. But keep it relevant, Mrs. Carver. Clara opened her ledger, and for the next hour, she methodically presented case after case of Weller's victims. She called Tom Brennan to describe the theft and arson. She called Sarah Mitchell to explain how Weller had forced her sale. She called Pete Dawson to testify about the brand alterations he'd been ordered to do. Each witness corroborated the others. Each story fit the pattern, and Clara tied it all together with documentation, dates, amounts, specific incidents that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence or fabrication. She watched Weller's face darken as the testimony mounted, watched Caldwell frantically whispering to him, trying to formulate a defense. Your Honor, Clara said finally, we're not asking you to take our word against Mr. Weller's. We're presenting documented evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 5 years. The challenge to my husband's claim is just the latest example. We ask that you dismiss this challenge and investigate Mr. Weller's other land acquisitions for similar fraud. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Harrison called for silence, then looked at Weller. Mr. Weller, would you like to respond to these allegations? Weller stood, and Clara saw barely controlled rage in his eyes. Your Honor, this is a coordinated attack by people who lost their ranches through their own poor management. I've done nothing illegal. Every land transaction I've conducted has been legitimate. Then you can explain why you altered brands on stolen cattle, Pete Dawson called out. Why you had me change Luke's mark to yours on those 6 cows you took last month. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order! I will have order! He glared at both sides. This has gone well beyond a simple claim dispute. Mr. Caldwell, does your client wish to withdraw the challenge? Caldwell and Weller conferred in heated whispers. Finally, Caldwell stood. Your Honor, perhaps in the interest of resolving this matter, my client would be willing to withdraw the challenge if the Carvers agree not to pursue the other allegations. No, Clara said firmly. We don't negotiate with thieves. Either the judge rules on the merits or Mr. Weller withdraws unconditionally. Judge Harrison studied the papers before him, then looked at Luke's original claim documents. Mr. Carver's claim appears to be in perfect order. The supposed deficiencies mentioned in the challenge are either fabricated or immaterial. I'm ruling that the claim is valid and the challenge is dismissed. Relief flooded through Clara, but Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, based on the testimony presented here, I'm referring this matter to the Territorial Marshal for investigation. If even half of what's been alleged is true, there are serious criminal charges to be answered. He fixed Weller with a hard stare. You're not above the law, Mr. Weller, no matter how much land you own. Weller stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. You'll regret this, Harrison. All of you will regret this. Is that a threat, Mr. Weller? Judge Harrison's voice was ice. Because threatening a judge in open court is a crime I can address immediately. Weller seemed to realize how close to the edge he was. He turned and stalked from the courtroom, Caldwell hurrying after him. The room erupted in conversation. The newspaper reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Tom Brennan whooped and slapped Luke on the back. Sarah Mitchell was crying with relief. And Clara stood in the middle of it all, feeling something she hadn't felt since Philadelphia destroyed her: vindication, justice, the sweet satisfaction of truth prevailing over power. Luke pulled her into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone, not caring who saw. You did it. Clara, you did it. We did it, she corrected. All of us together. They stayed in Helena for 2 more days while the Territorial Marshal took formal statements and began his investigation. The newspaper articles that appeared the next morning were everything Clara could have hoped for. Detailed accounts of the hearing, descriptions of Weller's pattern of fraud, calls for prosecution. Grant Weller's empire began to crumble almost immediately. Other victims came forward. Buyers who'd purchased land from Weller discovered questionable titles. The territorial government announced a comprehensive review of all land transactions in the region. And on the 3rd day, word came that Weller had fled the territory, abandoning his ranch and heading south toward Mexico. He's gone, Luke said, reading the telegram with disbelief. Just gone. Men like him always run when they can't bully their way out, Clara said. They're only strong when they're winning. Tom Brennan organized a celebration at a Helena saloon that night, and their group of victims turned victors gathered to toast their unlikely triumph. Clara found herself pulled into conversations, her hand shaken until it hurt, her strategic mind praised by people who'd spent years feeling powerless. You could have a real future here, Tom said, slightly drunk and very sincere. Helping people fight these kinds of battles. Advocate for folks who don't know how to navigate the law. Clara looked at Luke across the crowded room. He was laughing with Pete Dawson, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, his face lit with joy and relief. I already have a future, she said, on a ranch in Montana with a partner who sees me as an equal. That's all I ever wanted. The journey home took 3 days because they took their time, no longer racing against deadlines or running from threats. The landscape that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving on the way out now looked almost welcoming. The February sun was weak but present, and there was a feeling in the air that suggested spring might actually come eventually. When they finally crested the ridge above their valley and saw the cabin, Clara felt something expand in her chest. It wasn't much, a rough building, a struggling ranch, a hard life ahead, but it was theirs, earned through courage and partnership and refusing to quit. Home. They spent the evening settling back in, and after supper Clara found Luke outside, staring at the stars. Thinking about something? She asked, sliding her arms around him from behind. About how close we came to losing everything. About how you saved us with your brilliance and courage. He turned in her arms. I keep thinking about that auction, how I almost didn't go into town that day, how I almost didn't bid. But you did. $2. That's what I paid for the greatest treasure of my life. Clara smiled. I prefer to think we paid for each other. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I gave you hope when yours was dying. Fair trade. More than fair. Luke kissed her softly. Clara, I know we're already married on paper, but I want to do it again properly, with witnesses and celebration. I want the whole territory to know that you're not the woman I bought. You're the woman I chose, the partner I treasure, the love of my life. Tears stung Clara's eyes. I'd like that. Very much. Spring came slowly that year, but when it arrived, it brought transformation. The cattle in the high valleys emerged healthy and strong. Luke and Clara drove them to market and got top prices that not only cleared their debt, but left money for expansion. They hired 2 ranch hands, including Pete Dawson, who needed work after testifying against his former employer. The ranch that had been dying came back to life. New fences went up. The barn got repaired. They bought breeding stock and planned for a herd that would support not just survival, but prosperity. In late May, they held a wedding ceremony in Bitter Creek. Not because they needed to, the auction papers were legal enough, but because they wanted to mark the transformation from transaction to partnership to love. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Luke had bought her in Helena. Luke wore a new suit that actually fit. Tom Brennan stood up as witness, and Sarah Mitchell insisted on baking the cake. Half the territory seemed to show up, drawn by the story of the couple who'd fought Grant Weller and won. When Judge Harrison, who'd made the trip from Helena specifically for this, pronounced them married, Luke kissed Clara like it was the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. I love you, he whispered against her lips. My partner, my wife, my home. I love you too, Clara whispered back. My second chance, my future, my choice. The celebration lasted until midnight, and when they finally made it back to the ranch, exhausted and happy, Clara stood in the cabin that had become home and felt complete for the first time in her adult life. She'd lost everything in Philadelphia, had been broken and humiliated and cast out, had stood on an auction block and been bought for pocket change by a desperate man. And from that lowest point, she'd built something extraordinary. The years passed, and the ranch flourished. Luke and Clara expanded the herd, bought adjacent land when it became available, became known throughout Montana as fair dealers and hard workers. Clara's reputation for financial acumen spread, and she found herself advising other ranchers on management and planning. They had children, 3 daughters who grew up riding horses and managing cattle, and understanding that their mother was as much a rancher as their father. Clara made sure they learned to read and write and handle numbers, preparing them for a world that was slowly, grudgingly, making space for women with skills and determination. Every year on the anniversary of the auction, Luke would give Clara a small gift. The first year it was a silver locket. When she opened it, she found 2 polished silver dollars inside, the exact coins he'd slammed down on the auction block. To remember, he said quietly. Not where we started, but what we built from almost nothing. Clara wore that locket every day for the rest of her life, not as a reminder of humiliation or desperation, but as a symbol of courage, of the smallest, bravest decision that had rewritten both their lives. The decision to take a chance, to trust a stranger, to believe that partnership and honesty could triumph over power and greed. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the ridge above the valley and looked at what they'd created. The ranch spread below them, prosperous and well-managed. Cattle dotted the grasslands. The house, expanded from that original cabin, was warm and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear their daughter's laughter carrying on the wind. Do you ever regret it? Luke asked. Leaving Philadelphia, standing on that block, settling for a rough rancher and a hard life? Clara turned to him, this man who'd seen her worth when the world saw nothing, who'd treated her as an equal when others saw only property, who'd loved her not despite her brokenness but because of her strength. Not for one single moment, she said. This life, this partnership, this love, this home, it's everything I never knew I needed. You're everything I never knew I needed. Luke pulled her close, and they stood watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. 2 people who'd been broken by life and remade by love. 2 strangers who'd become partners, then lovers, then the foundation of a legacy that would outlast them both. You know what the best part is? Clara said softly. When people ask how we met, I can tell them the truth. That you paid 2 silver dollars for me at an auction, and it was the best investment either of us ever made. Luke laughed, the sound warm and genuine. $2 that bought a lifetime. Not a bad return. Not bad at all. They walked back toward the house as the stars began to emerge hand in hand, still partners after all these years. Behind them, the ranch that had almost died continued its steady pulse of life. Ahead of them, their daughters waited with questions about cattle and supper, and when Papa would tell them another story about Mama standing up to the bad man who tried to steal their land. And in Clara's pocket, the silver locket rested warm against her heart, its 2 polished coins a permanent reminder that the smallest act of courage, a stranger's kindness, a desperate woman's acceptance, 2 people choosing to build together, could change everything. The auction had made them legal partners. The winter had made them friends. The fight with Weller had made them warriors. But love, honest, hard-earned, absolutely equal love, had made them home to each other. And that was worth more than all the silver in Montana. Years later, when Clara was an old woman and Luke's hair had gone white, she would sit on the porch of their ranch house and tell her grandchildren the story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one, complete with humiliation and fear and desperate gambles. "The world tried to tell me I was worthless," she'd say, her voice still strong despite her age. "Standing on that block, hearing the laughter, watching man after man refuse to bid, it could have destroyed me. Maybe it should have." "But what happened instead, Grandma?" her youngest granddaughter would ask, already knowing the answer but loving the story. "Instead, I met a man desperate enough to take a chance on someone everyone else had rejected, and together we built something that lasted. Not because we were lucky or special, but because we refused to quit, because we chose partnership over pride, honesty over pretense, and love over fear." She'd touched the silver locket, worn smooth by decades of wearing. These $2 bought a chance. What we did with that chance, that was up to us. The children would run off to play, and Clara would sit in the evening light, remembering Philadelphia and Charles Whitmore's betrayal, remembering the cold November day and the auction block, remembering Luke's steady eyes as he placed those 2 coins down, remembering everything that came after, the work and struggle, the victory and love, the life they'd built from almost nothing. She'd been bought for pocket change and became priceless. She'd been broken and became strong. She'd been alone and became beloved. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that dignity wasn't about never falling, never struggling, never accepting help. Dignity was about standing back up, fighting back, and building something beautiful from the ruins. The silver dollars had bought a life, but courage, partnership, and love had made it worth living. And that, Clara thought, as the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, that was the real story worth telling. Not the humiliation of the auction, but the triumph of what came after. Not the $2, but the immeasurable value of what they'd built together. Not the ending she'd feared, but the beginning she'd never dared to hope for. Home.